Very interesting. I mean, you're very strong on this issue of the kind of the unintended consequences of sanctions. I wonder if you could explain for our viewers whether you think the sanctions that have been imposed so far are actually a mistake. Would you go that far?
Yes, because you can say unintended consequences, but there's actually a scientific basis for this. It's called complexity theory. We don't have to get too much down in the weeds. But again, 1998, which was the last time Russia defaulted, I think we can expect more Russian defaults going forward. But 1998, August 17th, they did default on their external debt and the ruble. But that actually started in Thailand in June 1997. It was kind of a run on the bank in Thailand. The baht was devalued. It spread. And by the way, the spread of financial distress is exactly like the spread of a virus. It's not just a metaphor. The math is the same. So that spread from Thailand to Malaysia to Indonesia to South Korea. And there was literally blood in the streets. People were killed in financial riots in South Korea. Then there was a little bit of a quiet period. Then it popped up in Russia. And it ended up in my lab. We were a hedge fund in Greenwich, Connecticut, but we had $1.4 trillion of derivatives on our books. And after the Russia default, spreads widened. So, but there's an example where you have a Thai currency crisis, and then a year later, every global market is on the verge of being closed. And that was the case. We got that bailout done. We got $4 billion in cash and propped up the balance sheet, and the Fed cut interest rates, and we went on from there. But as Wellington said, it was a close run thing. But we were prepared for every market in the world, beginning in Tokyo, to close sequentially. So now here we are in 2022. Same thing's happening. What was interesting yesterday is that Russia actually paid some sovereign debt in dollars. And everyone's like, wait a second, I got some calls yesterday. I thought we had sanctions. I thought we kicked them out of SWIFT. We kicked them out of the payment system. We froze their accounts. How come they got to pay dollars? Well, the answer is two things. Number one, a lot of those sanctions have delayed effective dates. They don't actually kick in until 30, 60, or 90 days, as the case may be. But more to the point, somebody in the Treasury, and it's always surprising when they get things right, but somebody in the Treasury woke up and said, wait a second, we don't need another financial crisis on top of a war coming out of a COVID pandemic. Let's let the Russians at least pay that coupon, and then we'll take it from there. So there's a little bit less than meets the eye in these sanctions. But somebody woke up and said, let's avoid a global liquidity crisis, because that's what you're heading for if you really enforce these sanctions. And beyond that, we're just shutting down the supply chain. Everyone's like, we're cutting off semiconductors to Russia. Okay, but how do you make semiconductors? Well, you make them in part with the neon gas that is used to power the lasers to do the etching in the semiconductors, and 70% of that gas comes from Odessa, which happens to be in Ukraine. So you can't, these systems, the supply chain system and the financial system, densely interconnected, very complex, and you can't chop off one part without affecting all the other parts.
So this is fascinating. I love your analogy about the virus, and what you're saying really is that this instability will spread and affect us all on a scale that I don't think people fully appreciate. So how high a price do you think the UK could pay for what is going on and the measures that have been taken against Russia?
Well, you're paying it every day for petrol, and it's going to affect food. Ukraine, one of its nicknames historically is the breadbasket of Europe. Now, I don't know how much grain the UK specifically gets from Ukraine, but again, these are global markets and global prices. So whatever your sourcing is, you're going to pay the global price. But when you look at Africa, depending on the country, somewhere between 25 and 50% of all the grain that those countries import comes from Ukraine. And of course, the Russians, as a matter of strategy, are taking over the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea ports. And they're going to cut off all exports from Ukraine. And Russia's exports themselves are cut off because of the sanctions. So how are we going to feed Lebanon and countries in Africa, not to mention the rest of the world? And as I say, even if you're not getting your grain from Ukraine, you are paying a world price. And so if the price skyrockets because of Ukraine, you'll pay that higher price. So it may, the financial shock that I talked about could yet happen. We could stumble into a global liquidity crisis. But every day at the grocery store, the gas pump, you're paying the price.